I understand that you are a hypnotist who specializes in between lives soul regressions, which is just a fascinating topic. Let me ask, before we get really into the topic, what brought you to this kind of work?
Well, let me mention, if I may, my website is yoursoulsplan.com. And if people go there, they can read large portions of Your Soul's Plan and Your Soul's Gift for free. The way I came to this work was I was in the corporate sector for a number of years. I actually have an MBA, which I think is unusual for the author of a couple of New Age books. And I was self-employed for quite a while as a marketing and communications consultant, basically doing different forms of corporate writing. I found that work to be tremendously unfulfilling. I used to say to people at the time that I had the feeling if I fell off the face of the earth, my clients would hardly notice. They would just plug somebody else into that role and carry right along. But at the same time, I had the sense that there was some kind of calling or some kind of purpose to my life. I just didn't know what it was, and I wasn't even sure how to figure out what it was. Now, I come from a very conventional background. So when I was having this, what you could call an existential crisis about my life, my first attempts to resolve it were really very conventional in nature. I went for career counseling. I took the Myers-Briggs inventory, which I'm sure many people know about. Found out I'm an INFJ personality type, and while that was interesting, it didn't tell me what to do with my life. And then I went to all my friends and family and I said, I'm really unhappy doing this corporate work. I feel like there's something else I should be doing. What do you think I should do with my life? And I will tell you, Lisa, that is not a good question to ever ask another person. About half the people I asked just shrugged their shoulders and said, I have no idea. And the other half told me to do whatever they were doing for a living, which, as you can imagine, was not tremendously helpful. So I thought, all right, I've got to think outside the box here. What can I do to figure out my soul's plan, so to speak? And this idea came to me, go see a psychic medium. Now, coming as I did from such a conventional background, I wasn't sure that I believed in mediumship. It certainly was not something I had tried before. But nothing else was working, and I thought, why not? I'll spend an hour of my time and a little money, and if nothing comes from it, there's no harm done. So I did this on May 7 of 2003. I had my first session ever with a psychic medium. She started the session by introducing me to the concept of spirit guides, which I had never even heard of at that time. And she explained that a guide is a highly evolved, non-physical being with whom we plan our lives before we're born, and who then guides us through our lives after we come into body. And through this particular medium, I was actually able to talk to my guides at length that day. They said to me, you planned your life, including your biggest challenges, before you were born, which was a concept I had never even heard of. And so, of course, I said, why in the world would I have done that? And they had an answer to that question. They said, you did this for purposes of spiritual growth. Now, again, coming as I did from such a conventional background, I would probably have dismissed all of this as some kind of delusion on my part, except that the guides then launched into this very detailed explanation of why I had planned my biggest challenges, and they knew what all of them were without me telling them anything. And I had also not told the medium anything before the session. So they went through these challenges one by one, and they said, you planned this one for these reasons and that one for those reasons. And the discussion just blew my mind, so to speak. So I came out of that session stunned, and I thought about this constantly for days and weeks after the session. And the effect that this perspective had on me was that it created a very deep healing, because it allowed me to see for the first time deeper meaning to the things that had been so challenging and that had actually seemed meaningless at the time they happened. So when I saw the kind of healing it created in me, I thought, okay, if this perspective on pre-birth planning can do this for me, then surely it can create a similar kind of healing for other people. And that was when I first started to think about writing a book on it. And then what happened from there, I don't know how much detail you want me to go into, but I started having spiritual experiences of my own for the first time in my life, which confirmed the information that had come through in the session with the medium. One thing led to another. And about 3 years later, I came out with Your Soul's Plan. And then a few years after that, Your Soul's Gift.
Wow. Now, I also want to mention for people who might wonder, Your Soul's Plan was originally titled Courageous Souls. Just wanted to let people know that they are the same book in case they're looking online for that. Um, okay, so let's go ahead and talk about what happens with the between lives regressions. Well, maybe we should back up and talk about how you got into doing this kind of work, and then let's talk about what happens during the regression.
Well, let me pick up then shortly after the session with the medium. Within just a couple weeks of that session, I had what to this day is the single most profound spiritual experience I've ever had. I was home in my apartment. This was in Evanston, Illinois, where I lived at the time. And it was a weekday. I was just having an average work day. And in the middle of the afternoon, I decided to take a break and go for a walk. So I'm walking down the sidewalk in Evanston when suddenly I was overcome by this feeling of pure, overwhelming, unconditional love for every person I saw. And when I say unconditional love here, I don't mean the kind of love you might feel for a parent or a child or a romantic partner. This was an experience of divine love. It was a transcendent experience. I remember it very clearly because the first person I saw after this feeling came over me was a cab driver. He was sitting behind the wheel of his cab waiting for a customer to come along. And I looked at this man, who was, of course, a total stranger to me, and just felt this pure, overwhelming, unconditional love for him. And then I looked up, and there was a man's barber shop on the corner. I looked through the window, and I saw the barber cutting a customer's hair. Again, two total strangers. But as I looked at them, there again was this feeling of pure, unconditional love. And then I turned around, and I saw a young woman, a mother, pushing an infant in a stroller down the sidewalk. And as I looked at them, there again was this pure, overwhelming, unconditional love. Everywhere I looked, every time I saw another person, this feeling was present. Now, I had never heard of anything like this or read about anything like this, but I understood intuitively what was happening, which was I was in some form of enhanced immediate communion with my own soul. In other words, it's as though my soul were saying to me, this love is who you really are. This is your true nature. Now, I believe that my soul gifted me with that experience that day because months and years later, after I had researched many, many people's pre-birth plans for Your Soul's Plan and Your Soul's Gift, what I found in the research is that literally every single pre-birth plan, no matter what is being planned, is based on great wisdom and complete unconditional love. If I had not had that experience of myself, my soul, as unconditional love walking down the street that day, I would still have found that same result in the research. But I think there would always have been this little voice at the back of my head saying, how do you know this is true? How do you know that every plan is based on unconditional love? Well, I know it's true because of that experience that day. I had an experience that showed me that we as souls are made literally from the energy of unconditional love. Now, within a short time of that experience, again, one thing led to another. And I just happened, quote unquote, to come into contact with several gifted mediums and channels who in one way or another could find out what somebody planned before they were born. I wasn't actually doing the hypnosis at that time in my life. So the people that I interviewed for Your Soul's Plan and Your Soul's Gift, I chose people who face very common challenges. And it's all the most common things we face here. Physical illness, mental illness, drug addiction, alcoholism, death of a loved one, accidents. If it's a common challenge, it's probably in one of the two books. And then the people I interviewed had 1, 2, or sometimes 3 sessions with the mediums in which we asked Spirit, did this person plan this experience before he or she was born? And then in the books, I present all the information that came through. Now, Your Soul's Plan came out in early 2007. And within a very short time of it coming out, I started to get emails from people all over the world, all of whom were saying exactly the same thing. They were saying, I want you to tell me what my life plan is. And for several years, I responded to those emails in the same way. I said, I'm not a medium, I'm not a channel, I don't know what you planned. If you want to know that, work with one of the mediums in the book. But then I learned of the work of Michael Newton, who is the hypnotist who founded the field of life between lives regression. I call it a between lives soul regression, but it's the same thing. It's a form of hypnosis in which the client goes into an unusually deep trance state. And while in that trance state, You talk to non-physical beings called the Council of Elders who know what your life plan is. They know everything about you, even every past life you've had. So when a client of mine gets in front of the council, they can get an answer to literally any question, as long as it's for their highest good to get the answer. And people will come out of a between lives soul regression and they'll say things like, the council answered literally every question I have about my life. I have no more questions. So this is potentially a life-changing experience for people.
Thanks for listening. Check out Castle Gate, a novel based on my own ancestral healing journey, at lisabonis.com. In 1921, 4 men set off from Scotland to the United States. Will Garrock, his brother Pete, his son Willie, and his nephew Thomas, all coal miners. They left behind the miners' rows and the nationwide mining strike with its soup kitchens. Their destination was Castlegate, Utah, where they had kin to welcome them before sending for their wives and children. They prospered in America, working in one of the finest mines in Utah. Until that tragic day, March 8th, 1924. Disaster struck. 3 explosions, trapping 171 men inside. Rescue crews worked tirelessly for days, but sadly, they could not save a soul. Women were widowed and children were orphaned, and some never recovered from their broken hearts. Castlegate is the true and tragic saga of a Scottish family whose dreams of finding their fortunes in the bountiful coal mines of Castlegate, Utah during the Prohibition era explode in one of the most devastating mine disasters in American history. Learn more at lisabonis.com.